All right, everybody, welcome to the Wednesday edition of Unexpected Points, another interview. And after two highly informative, stellar insight interviews that we've had over the last couple of weeks, I decided, you know what, let's take a week off. Okay, let's just get into some takes. And the theme of this episode is going to be blasphemous NFL takes that will get you canceled. And when I thought to myself, who doesn't care? Who is willing to stand against the tide? Who will say what's on his mind no matter what the NFL media establishment and football guys have to say? Who may thrive on it, actually. That person is none other than 538's Josh Hermsmeyer. Josh, thank you for joining me.
Wow, what an intro. And being iconoclast and you describing me, the contrarian of all contrarians, as far as I'm concerned, describing me as an iconoclast sounds pretty good. So thank you.
Yeah. I think I may bend the knee to the football establishment a little bit more often than you do, but you know, this is a safe space here for not having to worry about anyone on the outside. Cancellation via podcast probably happens a little bit less often than on the Twitter streets. So, but before we get into this, and we're going to have 5 blasphemous takes for each of us. We haven't heard each other's takes, other than one take I did give it as an example. So Josh has heard my first take. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask you something more on a personal level here. We like to get to know our guests a little bit more. I know you've been on the podcast before, but what I noticed recently is
we're former podcasting partners.
That is true. We are former podcasting partners, but even then, back in the olden days, I'm not sure if we got a little bit too much onto the inside. So what I'll say is what I've noticed about you from afar and in close is that you're a man of fine taste. I will say we saw you posting recently about a pizza that you were cooking. We've seen the culinary exploits. We've seen the whether it be craft beers or wine, the finer things there. A very well manicured home, as you can see in the background. Well coiffed, beautiful children and wife. Everything is good there. So I have to say is, how did you cultivate this real like snob lifestyle that you have going over there? And for an amateur snob, like I want to be a snob, but I'm too lazy. Where would you start on that path here? And I don't use it as a pejorative because it's something that I aspire to, quite honestly.
I mean, I would embrace snob if that was actually the kind of ethos I was espousing, because I really think like eat what you like, drink what you like, and so what drives all my hobbies and my desire to be interested in pizza and beer and all the rest is passion. So if you have passion in something, you naturally want to understand it, and then you get deep into it, and just like we do with football analytics. So that's kind of the reason why I am that way. But how do you get started, man? I mean, the great thing about beer is anyone can make it. So if you enjoy frosty brew, you can just get yourself a carboy and some yeast and some grain or even a kit and go to town, and you'll be amazed at the quality you can make in your garage. When it comes to pizza, I mean, it's flour and water, yeast and salt. That's it. A little bit of cheese and toppings, you're good to go. So like, you know, the interesting part is these deceptively simple undertakings can be rich and deep, and you can go down a rabbit hole for your entire life trying to perfect those things. And I guess that's why I'm drawn to them.
Yes. So sorry. I'm misqualifying as a snob. It's more a quest to find meaning in life. How about that? Does that does that sound like it for you?
Or at least take my mind off things. I don't know. It's been a pretty rough stretch of years here for everyone. So.
Oh yeah. Getting older will do that. So it's good to have midlife crises can come quite early also. So that's good. It's also something to invest in heavily. Okay. So on the personal side, everyone out there, go ahead, get your yeast on, get your pizza making on. I'm still not going to do it because I'm too lazy. I'm just going to go buy it at the store, but I like it in theory and I respect it. All right, so let's get into the blasphemous takes here. I will go first. Again, we're going to have 5 each. And there are a couple of like topical things going on in the NFL, some Deshaun Watson stuff going on as it's, you know, the drip on Deshaun Watson there. And I talked about it a little bit earlier this week, but we'll get into that because I think Josh has a Browns take that we can get into that. Aaron Donald contract, I have a take on that, but I have an Aaron Donald blasphemous take that I'll also get into a little bit later where we can talk about that too. So let's get right into the take. So the first one that I'm going to mention is one that I told to Josh before the podcast here. So he's not going to be surprised by this one. Something I've talked about a little bit before, but I want to frame it in a little bit stronger way here. And that my take is going to be head coaches should not be involved at all in fourth down decision making. So that's the take. And the reason being that I think there is a lot of evidence, not only within the NFL, but when there have been studies on human adjustments and interventions to well calibrated models outside of the NFL, whenever that happens, normally the bias that the human will introduce into it, whether it's being too conservative, being too aggressive, however it may fall out, ends up being a net negative overall to the output that you're going to get from the decision making rather than just following what you're doing. And I think one piece of evidence that Ben Baldwin has provided as part of his fourth down model, which really lays it out starkly, and you can see this on stuff that he's published on Twitter. I'll describe it a little bit here, but basically he plotted out how often teams go for it based upon what his model is saying teams should do. So the theory behind coaches being a value add to these fourth down decisions is they can incorporate information that is not part of the model. And when you look at his information, when the model has a 2% win probability loss or even a worse outcome according to a worse expectation according to his model, teams never go for it. Basically, it's between 0 and 3% of the time that teams are ending up going for it. So they are strictly adhering to what the model would be telling them. Whereas on the flip side of things, if it's over 1% gain, over 2% gain, and so on, it only starts off with teams going for it maybe 30-40% of the time. So again, the equivalent would be them going for it 98% of the time in these circumstances. And then it slowly builds up to when you're getting an obvious situation where it's a 10% win probability gain in one decision, teams are doing that almost 100% of the time. So what it's showing here is that even if coaches are incorporating information, they're not doing it in a balanced way. It's an asymmetric way where the value loss on incorporating that information seems to be pretty high in their decision not to go for it, and they really aren't gaining any value on the information that they could be adding that would say that their team has a better chance of getting it than you would expect. That is just rarely coming through. So I think that whole framework is how I look at this to say, you know what? Let's just take coaches completely out of the decision. We don't have head coaches calling all the plays on offense and defense. We don't have head coaches making all these other things where they're not really the experts on that. Let's just go ahead, forget about tradition, forget about everything else is. Let's find the best person to make this decision who can be detached from some of the emotion of the leadership and decision making of the head coach. Allow them, empower them to make these few decisions that we see during the year, and you're going to have a net benefit for your team. Your thoughts, Mr. Hermsmeyer?
Well, I don't think you would expect me to disagree with that, and I think that what you were citing, the research you cited at the start, was from Cade Massey, I believe, and it was algorithm
Yes.
aversion, and just a seminal piece of work. I remember before I knew Cade, was one of the first things I read from him, besides Lizard's Curse and all the things he's famous with. But it was relatively new at the time, and it was shocking. I think it was his follow up study where he said the only way to make it work is to allow them to turn the knobs and within a small bound, right? So you can allow them to mess with it so that they will believe in it, but you can't allow them to mess with it too much, as they'll actually destroy the value. So it's really interesting, and I completely agree. I have a take on fourth downs as well, so I guess I'll just roll right into it because it kind of overlaps with what
Okay,
you're saying.
let's do it. Let's do it. You can roll into it, and then we can talk about
Yeah,
the
then
different
talk about
aspects of
them
my take
together.
and your take.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
So
do it.
I don't think there's such a thing as being too aggressive on fourth down. So I think when we look at these models like the one you were discussing from Ben Baldwin and others, sometimes you'll see the nerds online kind of debating whether or not you should or shouldn't go. Well, I think it's directionally always correct to be aggressive for a lot of the reasons you've already stated. And most coaches are naturally conservative. So teams should, I think, just lean into it. And so when we argue about these instances in the margin of error, I just think that where it's maybe incorrect to go for it. I think it's counterproductive in the large picture. So you just assume you're going for it every time, unless there's a a very good reason not to. And maybe that's where coaches can put some of that information that is not captured in the model into decisions to actually say, no, we're going to buck the auto go for it trend and say no this one time. But because those reasons do exist. But I think you need to establish the fourth down culture, even if a couple decisions here and there might be strictly negative EV. And like for one instance, I think my understanding is that in LA, Chargers head coach Brandon Staley, he doesn't consult a game strategy guy during the game. He just goes for it on vibes every time, almost, right? And that's perfectly fine with me. Like he can dial things in later or never, or maybe he just stays the way he is. It's a better, more exciting brand of football, even if they never get it exactly right.
No, I like that. Yeah, so Staley in particular, he had a couple of decisions this past season. I want to say against the Chiefs where they ended up winning that game. There was a 4th and 9, maybe near the end of the game, that they ended up going forward and drawing a pass interference call and then scoring eventually and putting through there. That would have been borderline at best, according to model. So I'll add maybe to your take. This is something that popped into my head there. Is that even if, according to a model, it is negative EV to go for it in a particular situation, if you establish what you're talking about, this mindset, if we're always going to go for it on 4th down, it takes out any kind of friction and decision points and having to shift in and out of mentality when you're talking about from the play caller's perspective, where they just know that you're going to go for it on 4th down. So it's not like, hey, we're thinking about maybe if we get within X number of yards, you could think about treating this 3rd down like this. Like you take that out of the equation automatically. You take out any sort of delay that happens there. You take out everything else and you just go for it immediately in those circumstances, that the play caller can then really open up and become a fruitful way of looking at the entire set of downs rather than having to think about it as these distinct decisions, will we or won't we, as the drive is playing out.
Yeah, agree completely. Because that's one of the major benefits of having that communication open and quick is that your play caller can know, hey, it's 2 to get it. Going into 3rd down, it's 2 to get it, and so you can call that 3rd down play with a view towards the 4th down play, and there's a lot more there's some optimization in play calling that can be had there. So I agree. I think that we're a long way from getting to that place in the NFL, and that's in large part due to how head coaches view their role once they finally get that role. They're no longer many of them, the CEO types, are no longer micromanaging the offense. They're no longer controlling the defensive play calls. They're allowing their people underneath them to do that. And so it's almost like, well, what am I doing then? Am I just head cheerleader? There has to be some decisions I get to make. I think that has something to do with their aversion to giving up that responsibility. But I agree with you. I think we should hopefully see more of that in the future. I think as we get more analytics inclined GMs.
Now, of course, like I mentioned, the last couple of guests that I had have told us how uninteresting the whole 4th down discussion is. So we got to start with that, obviously.
Yeah.
We'll lean straight into that one. All right, so I'll go with my second take here. This is a little bit like more of a first take-ish sort of take rather than a football analytics guy thing. I'll come back to some of those later, but okay, my second take, and let's see whether the market's kind of come to me a little bit on this discussion, is that I'm going to say Kyle Shanahan is not a top 10 NFL head coach. Like I would not pick him if I had to pick an NFL head coach. He would not be in the top 10 names that I would want. And why? Well, why is that the case? Well, I feel like coaching is extremely difficult to judge. We hear a lot of things about the brilliance of certain coaches, guys like Shanahan versus others, how they can affect things, how players love these certain things. But again, a lot of these takes that we have for what they're doing, we don't really have a great gauge on how to value those things, how they are reflected on the field. We'd have a much better way of gauging teams, if they're going for it on 4th down or not, maybe their pass run ratios, how they're doing things in free agency and the draft, and how they're affecting the front office. And I would say on all of those things that we can measure pretty well, he's just bad. He's borderline awful when it comes to the front office and his effect of what's going on there. I mean, I don't need to get a laundry list of things here, but there have been various signings. There have been taking guys off of the board, putting them back on the board. There have been trading up for guys who never end up getting used. And then even this last draft, we saw this fiasco where I'm not really sure they actually wanted Trey Lance or not. And even when they talked about the reason for trading these draft picks and then moving up, it sounded like it was more of an injury concern when it came to someone like Jimmy Garoppolo than necessarily needing to upgrade the play. Although a lot of people have said that Shanahan realized that. I don't know if he really did. And I think there's, who knows what would end up happening if they had those picks now. But I think even the on-field results, I would push back a little bit about whether you have that much evidence that he has affected things pretty well. I mean, I think one of the first things that I've heard about a few times, and I heard an interview with Mitchell Schwartz the other day, who used to be on the Browns back then. Shanahan was the offensive coordinator for the Browns in 2014 before moving to the Falcons the next year. And he was talking about how, the offense was finally functional. Brian Hoyer was playing well, and Hoyer's not a great quarterback, obviously, and everything else. And then I went back and I started to look at things. I mean, out of 30 qualifying quarterbacks, Brian Hoyer was third to last in his efficiency that season. The offense was bottom 10, 24th in offensive efficiency that season, but they were 12th in defense, a big jump for the Browns, and they went 7-9 that season. So again, I kind of dispute that a little bit. Going to 2015, now everyone remembers the 2016 Matt Ryan, Hall of Fame quarterback, one of the greatest seasons that the greatest season he's had of his career. Well, 2015, Shanahan's first year there was Ryan's worst year of his career in his efficiency. Bottom 10 offense for the Falcons. And then, the next year, Ryan had this huge spike in efficiency. Julio Jones went ham. They had the number one offensive line, according to PFF grades in run blocking, top 8-ish in pass blocking. So yeah, when everything fell into place, they had that one season at the top of the efficiency, and then they moved forward. And then again, kind of going forward to what's happened with the 49ers, he hasn't been successful except for in when he's had Garoppolo there in 2019 and 2021. But even then, the last 3 seasons, the 49ers have had a top 10-ish sort of defense in their defensive efficiency, and their offensive efficiency has plummeted as being bottom 10 when Garoppolo hasn't been there, and then jump back up when Jimmy G has been there. So I guess I just incorporate all of these different things. I'm not comfortable saying that he gives you such a certainty of offensive efficiency as a play caller that I can look past the other clear negatives that I see for Shanahan. So he's not going to be a guy that I would lean into if I were building a team. Agree, disagree, too hot, not hot enough?
I would say Shanahan is a guy that's probably one of those gentlemen who's probably better suited to just be an offensive coordinator. And I think if he had
Yes.
stayed in that role and he could get paid like a head coach, everyone would win. Like the organization would win. He would get to do what's best for him. Yeah, obviously everybody who has a little bit of an ego and thinks they can do it as well as the next guy wants to have a say and wants to have their voice heard, and they want to be part of the decision making process, if not control it. And he certainly has that in San Francisco. And so I guess to to the extent that there's a lot of luck driving draft decisions and injury and that kind of thing, which he's had his share of bad injury luck, whether it's at the beginning of last season with Mostert, which we kind of poo poo this because he did such a good job with Debo, but I do think he's a guy who needs a fast running back who can get to the edge. Like he's just that's the prototypical guy he needs in that system to really make everything go because he is a run first offensive coach. And so I think he lost a lot last season and still did well. He still did pretty good, and I think he can scheme really really well. So I would say he belongs in the NFL. Probably not as a head coach, but good luck ever getting him back happy and being a robust caller of plays alone, and not a guy who demands some kind of seat at the table for decision making, which I kind of agree with you. He's pretty bad at. Trey Sermon, I think my colleague at Established the Run, Evan Silva, was saying he looked like he was carrying a piano on his back last year. I
Yeah,
mean,
he was saying he might get cut. Again, you're saying that he needs a fast guy. Like that, that's not right. That's not the guy. That's not the guy. I traded up for him, right?
Yeah, that's not the guy. And he did the same thing, pounded the table for a third round guy a couple years back. And I'm blanking on the name because he's been so terrible and never really had any run. I think this was his first year, and he pounded
Oh, well, yeah, we had Joe Williams he
Joe
brought in
Williams.
a
That's
very
it.
long time ago. In the I'm sure it was the third or fourth round, but yeah, the guy basically never played. That was the guy that he took off of the board. They went into the draft saying this guy's off of our board, and he's like, you know what? Let's bring him back onto the board and let's trade up for him. Just not great, not great.
Right, right. So I agree with that. Well, let me roll into another take, and this one is kind of 49ers adjacent, so it makes sense. But
Okay.
I think given the current rules and state of play, the entire ideology behind the coverage of linebackers, coverage linebackers, middle off-ball linebackers who cover, I think it's flawed and it should just be fired into the sun. I mean, paying them top of market, drafting them high, all of it is a bad use of resources. It's poor team building. You cannot rely on them. You can't even rely on a top tier defensive back year over year. Like you can't say we're definitely going to get X out of this guy in coverage. It's just so multifaceted, and it's even more the case that you can't rely on coverage from the linebacking position, at least in the aggregate. And so whatever it is you saw on tape, right, that put the thrill up your leg this year is likely not going to be there next year. I mean, you can cut up as much as you want this year and show me all these great plays where he's roboting his ass off. But the point is the next year you're probably not going to get that same result. And so I think if you want a coverage guy like that can help in the run game and muscle up to a tight end, you get a cheap guy. Like just picking a guy out of the air like Tariq Carpenter. So the Packers, they drafted him in the 7th round this year. He played safety at Georgia Tech. He's like 6'4", 225, and he'll probably slide into the middle as an off-ball linebacker if he pans out. But he's the 7th round pick, so he probably won't. But if he does, and you insist on getting a big guy who can fill and stop the run and cover a little, I think that's the direction to go. And that's the type of price you should be paying.
Okay. Well, first, I'm glad that you already went into this because I was going to make a joke before we started that all 5 of your takes can't be that Fred Warner is overrated and shouldn't be paid and should be left destitute on the side of the road somewhere, as people seem to believe that you think. So let me tell you, is this a Fred Warner take? Is this the Fred Warner debate coming out here, basically?
I mean, there's definitely some Fred Warner in this. I mean, I remember when the Niners announced the signing last year. I mean, they had such a good deal getting him in the 3rd round, and there's people I respect inside the NFL who had him much higher ranked. He couldn't believe he'd fallen all that way, and I think they got lucky and they got a good pick, and then they screwed it all up. And they screwed it all up by overpaying. And I think you may not be able to find Warner again in the 3rd round, right? Year over year over year. But those are the shots you should be taking, and you shouldn't be fouling it all up by paying top of market as soon as the guy hits year 4, year 5.
Yeah, how much do we now? What it's gonna be an interesting test case, and of course, you never want to overplay any particular test case unless it backs up your take. Then, of course,
Then
go
it's
go
okay.
all in, go all in on it. Is going to be Bobby Wagner now coming to the Rams is an interesting one because again, he's another one of these guys. Huge contract, didn't really pay off, I would say, for Seattle on the big contract that he negotiated there. He's another kind of coverage sort of guy. I'm trying to think of other names there. Corey Littleton is probably a name I remember people being kind of excited about the fact that he was leaving the Rams after a great coverage season and signed to a 3-year, $36 million contract with the Raiders in 2020. He basically flamed out. It wasn't very good, did not pay off there. So you're saying this is more of a universal sort of thing. And would you say it's accentuated by when these guys are changing from one team to another?
I would absolutely say that if you're talking about the uncertainty surrounding their performance in coverage, absolutely. I mean, it's so much again to do with the schemes that are called, with their comfort in those schemes, and then also the particular techniques they're asked to do. And I think who's another guy? Was it Devin Smith on the Falcons? Wasn't he a sideline to
Mm-hmm.
sideline guy? People thought he could cover the hook and the quick outs and stuff like that, and he was just going to be this amazing guy. And now this last year, I mean, they're talking about cutting him out. I haven't kept up on Devin Smith, but I know he had a terrible year last year, and now there's talk of Atlanta letting him go or trading him. So
Yeah. I think there's a couple. I mean, well, one of the guys that they were hoping was going to be a coverage guy was when the Steelers the Steelers traded up, and then so they've had this thing too where he wasn't like an established cover guy, but when the Steelers traded up for Devin Bush, I think it was that they traded up for into the top 10. So he kind of flamed out there. And I think you're right for the Falcons. They were concerned with. I'm trying to think of what the exact thing was. They were concerned and they didn't want to trade and back out of everything with Matt Ryan last year because of the fact that they wanted to make sure that they could retain Deion Jones as their linebacker, I think it was. So
Deion
yeah,
Jones.
he's another guy that peaked one year and then they've been trying to like recapture that sense.
Yeah, Deion Jones is the linebacker I met. The first round pick for Atlanta, sidelined
Yeah.
guy. Yeah, so they overpaid him, and it made them in a pickle with Matt Ryan. Sorry about the Devin Smith. That's Tampa Bay. But anyway, so
Yeah. There's a lot of Devons and a lot of things going on at the linebacker position.
Yeah. So anyway, but I do think in general, overpaying that position is one of the worst sins in all of kind of upper level football management, and I think we've seen after last year the folly of it. I mean, Fred Warner wasn't terrible, but he was nowhere near elite, and it was the most predictable thing in the history of the world.
Yeah. There was a funny thing with the discourse on Warner because I go, yeah, you had it pretty inflamed. You had it pretty hot. You came in pretty hot about the.
I said
I
they
think it
should
might
be
have been
ashamed. I said they should
I
be
should be ashamed. That's what, I
Yeah.
thought it was like an abomination or something. Yeah, so you said the 49ers should be ashamed for that contract. You're ashamed doing this whole shame Game of Thrones thing on them. And then you got attacked after that, which meant that the beauty of film analysis is you can just clip like 4 plays and then be like, boom, roasted Hermsmeyer. Look, he could still guard people. That discounts your entire analysis, despite the fact that Warner himself was saying that he was struggling.
Oh my goodness! Even the GM said that he wasn't
Yeah.
performing up to standard, and then Warner apologized in the middle of the season. It couldn't have gone any more predictably.
Yeah, that's definitely blasphemous. You already caught hell for that, so it's good to let's lean right back into that one. Okay, all right, this is not too hot, but this is an idea that I've had, and it goes on an older theory. So there was this theory, probably not the most well-named theory, back when I was doing some writing for RotoViz, and at the time, the kingpin there, Fantasy Douche, great name, of course. There, so the Fantasy Douche, the main man there at RotoViz, he had a theory which we kind of built on in a few different ways, where he called it the YOLO QB theory, and his theory was there are only so many like traditional pocket passer types who can execute an offense at a high level, who can, quote unquote, get a bucket, as they like to say now about these guys who can, under pressure or third down, make a play happen outside of structure, do something extraordinary. So guys who aren't just either an executor, like a robot executor, or someone who fades in these sorts of moments that you need. So his theory was, well, let's gather a handful of running quarterbacks. We don't care as much about whether the fact they may get injured, because we have other guys who could step in and kind of lean into that running quarterback ways. So this is not the same exact theory as that, but it's a little bit of a different theory, where I believe every team in the NFL should have some sort of platooning going on at quarterback, specifically in high leverage, short yardage situations. Every team should potentially even carry a third quarterback on the roster. So not necessarily someone you want to be your all-time backup, but someone you can use in those situations to provide some sort of passing threat, but then also a running threat on these downs, because it was kind of brought to my attention earlier this year when Jacoby Brissett signed with the Browns that, like, Brissett, not great necessarily quarterback, but I think he was 20 of 21 converting on 3rd and 4th and 1 in his career. Really excellent at doing something like that. So I feel like that should just be a bigger strategy, because the incremental benefit you're going to get from that is going to be worth whatever money you have to pay, whatever that roster spot is worth. And the problem is, I think teams are just, if it fails when they bring in this lesser running quarterback on a key 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, if it fails, they're going to feel so bad about taking out their star quarterback that is going to dissuade them from doing something that on average is better to do. Not only to mention, you have the injury risk that you can take away, like guys like Mahomes getting injured on a quarterback sneak, where now they bring in a tight end, Blake Bell, who played quarterback early in his career, to where he has no like credible threat to throw the ball, to come in and do sneaks and others. Like, why not just have that be an established position, someone extremely cheap that you can bring in to give you leverage, maybe even on 3rd and 2 or 3rd and 3 and other places, and really not get locked into needing to pass the ball, where passing is actually a negative EV versus running in a lot of these situations.
I think that's fair. I think my one pushback, and it sounds very football guy, but if this was something that works, and we've had examples of teams try things like it, like with Slash, the Pittsburgh Steelers way back when, with Cordell, uh, uh, Cordell Stewart, I think we would have seen more success, right? Like I know Slash eventually became the all-time quarterback, but there was a year where he came in and he did just what you said. He could throw the ball, but he also was a threat to run. I just think I don't know that there are play callers and play designers who can wrap their head around it for whatever reason and make it effective. And maybe that is a constraint that can be overcome, and you just need the right guy in there who can build a system and can work around two quarterbacks, work a team together, and so that they can be cohesive throughout a series, even when they have guys coming in and out. I just wonder how much of that is an impediment to implementing that scheme and that strategy, just because we haven't really seen it be effective in the NFL yet.
Yeah, I think there's some of that, right? But I would lean a little bit more on this concept of, rather than coaches having risk aversion, sometimes they have like this regret aversion that they're really going against. So for me, I think what coaches think is, okay, I have X quarterback. Who, I don't know how good of a quarterback it may be that we're going to say hits the bar on this sort of thing. I don't know, Kirk Cousins or someone like that. Even though Kirk Cousins maybe not that, maybe he's not high enough to really think about. Let's say you have Kirk Cousins in there, and it's this like critical 4th and 1 play, 4th and 1 yard and a half, and if you run the play with Cousins and you fail, you're like, okay, well, we failed in the play, Whereas you bring in this other guy, the fans will be like, what's going on? And you fail with this other guy, despite the fact that you're flipping coins basically in a lot of situations here. Like, that flip where it comes up against you is going to feel so much worse. You're going to have to answer so many more questions about it. You're going to be like, why didn't we just do what we felt comfortable with? Because I think that comes into this weird thing that teams don't run the ball more in these circumstances, because it feels fatalistic when you run the ball and it doesn't work. Whereas if you drop back the pass or you roll it and pass, even when it doesn't work, it doesn't feel as fatalistic, because you're like, well, I could have thrown it here, I could have gone there. It can be executed. Whereas if a guy runs the ball and just gets stuffed, it feels like that play had no chance, and then you're just going to regret it that much more.
I think you've hit on something that people talk about a lot, and Mitchell Schwartz has before, the idea of how it feels when you are successful running. And I think it's the exact opposite of what you just said. You feel like
Yeah.
no one can stop you, right? You're literally dominating the game of football in the way it was meant to be played, in the trenches, right? You're physically imposing your will. And so, yeah, losing in that fashion instead of going YOLO and just trying to chuck it up there, I imagine you're correct. It does feel worse.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably like use these guys to do other stuff too on the offense. I'm not saying it has to be like Taysom Hill. You don't have to pay Taysom Hill ridiculous amounts of money, right? To find another UDFA who's like 30 years old and has those sort of skills. I just feel like those guys are out there too, in a sort of way to bring in, and maybe you can use them in different fashion. So that would be my thing. Bring them in, use that roster spot, go ahead and give it a shot sometimes.
All right, here's my next thing. The NFL should abolish the salary cap. There's no
Oh,
evidence.
all right here.
There is no
Okay.
evidence that the cap creates parity. You put a salary floor in as well to protect the guys on the fringe, so that it absolutely has to be a part of this as well. But if you do these
Yeah.
things, you'll have destroyed the basis for much of current analytical thinking, which is a huge positive if you want to own the nerds. You'll also take the roof off elite players who are trying to grab the bag, which I think should be something we could all applaud. Some salary cap apologists are going to point to baseball, right? But they're wrong. They're just wrong. Baseball, which has no cap, they do have a luxury tax, but it's not the same. There's no hard cap. Hasn't had a repeat champion in 21 years. All right. Since 2010, 29 of 30 teams have made the playoffs. All right. Maybe they'll trot out soccer, but ultimately, comparisons to other sports, I think, are dumb. We have a natural experiment in the NFL itself, And the salary cap was completely unable to do the main thing its proponents said it would do, and that was to prevent a dynasty. In fact, instead, what we got was the greatest dynasty in the history of the NFL up in New England. And so I think some, I don't understand, but some will still maintain that an unfair system makes for a fairer game. And I think that's nonsense up and down the line.
Okay, well, fair. I mean, I think there's probably some like it probably helps in some ways, but it probably doesn't help as much ways as you're saying. I guess a couple different points here. The baseball example, I think is interesting. Then again, when you get to the playoffs in baseball, you're flipping coins basically. Who's going to end up winning a lot of these different series? So, like repeat champions, maybe not, but you could have some dominance for the teams. What I do think is interesting from an NFL perspective is that the revenues the teams bring in are much closer, as a much lower like variation than there is in the major leagues and that there is in the NBA because they have local television contracts that go to the team. So if you're the Yankees, you have a huge television contract. If you're the Warriors, you have a huge television contract. If you're the NFL, everything is split evenly for these different contracts. The additional money that you make is through ticket sales, it's through merchandising, it's through other things. So there's less of a imbalance there. So the salary cap could be exploited a little bit less in that circumstance. But what my other suggestion would be, what about something like a soft cap, like they have the um, in the NBA, where you can go over the cap, but then you're paying a penalty over the cap. I believe in the NBA, there's a cap amount, and then every dollar you spend over that cap amount, you have to like contribute an extra dollar to some sort of, I don't know, NBA slush fund or something like that.
Yeah, I think that baseball has something similar to the luxury tax. I think that's fine. I'd be open to that as well. But I mean, think of all the knock-on benefits. So, like, here's an example of why I'm excited about this idea of no cap. I mean, besides it just being inherently unfair, because you're literally robbing Peter to pay Paul within a team environment, and that isn't good, right, for a team. So, I think one of the great things I would love to see is a team of all stars on defense. So we know that defense is a weakling system. Well, what if there's no weak link? What what would that look like in the NFL against Patrick Mahomes? I would love to see that. We'll never see that with the cap. There's no way you're going to be able to field a team of all stars and still put an offense that's respectable on the field in the current cap league. So that would be something I think we would get to see. I think you would see an all-star offensive line and maybe a resurgence of tactical running that's actually plus EV. And I'm not saying that it would be absolutely, in terms of absolute value of number of yards per play, would be equal to passing, but there would be maybe a point where it'd be marginally beneficial to run again versus a pass. And I think that would be good for football. So I think there's lots of reasons to think that the salary cap would not destroy the league and parity as we know it, and because we have an example, an actual experiment from the league itself that shows that, look, we haven't really gotten that much worse at all, with in terms of or much better at all in terms of parity, since we've instituted the cap. It's fair, and we'll have opening for new strategies, which I think would be tremendous for the
Yeah. Now I can also see probably impetus for more owner turnover, which we have not seen nearly as much in the
game. Great
NFL as
point.
we have in other sports.
Great point.
Since, if you're Tepper or someone, you come in with $16 billion, you're going to grind out a little bit more on top of that cap as opposed to Mark Davis, whose dad, bought the team whenever it was 70 years ago and now has something worth $1 billion, but no real money outside of that adventure. Okay, I like that. All right. So next here is that let's get into Aaron Donald. So we can talk about Donald. We can talk about the contract a little bit here. So I'm going to violate one of the rules of the internet and Twitter specifically, but we're podcasting, so I think it's okay here. And plus, I think we're past the statute of limitations. And that rule is you never hold someone else's L. So if someone's taking a big L and getting destroyed, don't come in there and be like, I think they might be reasonable. Like you don't. There's no point. Don't prostrate yourself out there and go and get beat up by the crowd. Also, so the L that I'm gonna partially hold here is that I think I agree with Brian Burke, ESPN, Seth Walder, our friends over there, who said that Aaron Donald is not really a great run defender. Okay, and
Whew.
they got crushed for it. It was pretty fun, honestly, that day to see things. I think PFF. I think we were subtweeting them by putting his grading on there and other stuff. Brandon Thorne, trench expert, had one of my favorite tweets of all time, which was the analytics community took a step back today. I'm afraid, which I like the "I'm afraid" at the end too. But so that was good. I repurposed that many times after that, but so they had a study at ESPN where they looked at their run stop win rate and their run block win rate numbers using tracking data, and they found out that Donald was not really winning according to their definition on here a lot. And I think there was just like this huge confusion between people talking past each other, which never really, obviously happens a lot on there. But you do look at the numbers. The Rams don't really perform any better against the run when Donald's in the game versus when he's out of the game. They perform extremely better against the pass, but it's not that like Donald couldn't be a great run defender. It's just that the way he plays, shooting gaps, going up the field, it's going to be that much more beneficial to making big impact defensive plays against the run for stopping someone in the backfield. But then also leaving wide open holes that others are going to have to fill. So he's technically winning his gap, but then leaving a huge gap for someone else to have to fill in afterwards. And it kind of comes through in the numbers. Again, his EPA per play for the Rams is worse when he's on the field than when he's off against the run. But again, like in a net sense, with him also against the pass, it's a beneficial way of playing because he's using that same thing to shoot the gap and eventually go ahead and sack the quarterback. So I just think that like people need to chill out and just to say that someone's overall impact can be huge, but at the same time, you're not going to say the Rams are a great run defense team because they have Aaron Donald and he makes these plays in the backfield sometimes. In general, I do agree with ESPN that he probably is a net negative, slight net negative to that side of the game while bringing a huge net positive against the pass.
And I guess I have nothing negative to say about your analysis. I agree with all of it. I think it's again a big part of this is how you market your idea. And in this case, this was a hot take, right? This was a hot take, and we're going to get some eyeballs on this idea. Whereas I think the way you've laid it out is that it's more of this whole idea of Belichick in the Super Bowl with the Giants, where you're going to allow the Bills to run on you because that's okay. We would rather have that outcome rather than lose the pass. Well, if it's the case that Donald has made the choice that he's going to sell out to try and do the most important thing a lineman can do, which is take out the quarterback or pressure him, and the cost to that is a little more effective run game. I think any smart coach or team builder or teammate would say, "You go do you, Donald. You do that thing." And I think that that's a much more reasonable way to put it. Of course, anyone saying something bad about Donald, is probably going to get some people coming at you. So maybe there's no way around it.
Okay, well, do you have? Yeah, I mean, I think the thing was the ESPN piece was entitled Aaron Donald is like an average run defender or something like that. And the truth is, it's not that he's actually an average run defender. It's that he plays in a way where his effect on running plays is about average versus other defensive tackles who don't play in a certain sort of way and so on and so forth. But what do you think about this Donald contract? Because this is like pretty wild that they basically tore up the 3 years remaining on his contract and then gave him $40 million more over the next 3 years. So I guess Donald's leverage was he might retire, but I don't think we've seen anything anywhere close to like this in the past. Do you have a take on that?
I was when I saw the first analysis come out yesterday, and I haven't done any more today. If there's new details that's come out, but Jason at Over the Cap did a brief analysis after Florio reported the details as kind of shaky and as flimsy as they are whenever Florio is reporting. They the number I saw was like 16.9% of the cap in 2023, and that was eyebrow raising. And I think sometimes we get caught up in raw numbers, and I really think you have to take projected cap into the future and use a percentage of it to try and understand what the actual effect on the team build will be. And next year, spending 17% on Donald is going to be interesting for LA. I haven't taken a look at all the guys that are coming up next year and what that's going to mean for signings. It certainly is going to have an impact or has had an impact on the negotiations with Odell Beckham. I mean, I've seen news reports that perhaps he might be reunited in Cleveland, but that would be super interesting and unexpected. But I think that this decision with Donald, I think, is going to impact those kind of decisions. There's going to be a trickle down throughout the next 2 years, and while he's worth it, while I think he deserves every dollar, and it is unprecedented. It is one of those things where look. I'll put it this way: I'm glad Les Snead is in the league. I'm glad there are guys doing it differently. I might not do it that way, or maybe I would if I was in his shoes. I don't know, but like, I love that there's guys that are going stars and scrubs that are trading all their picks, going in now, going big, paying their stars. I think it makes for a much more interesting league, and I like seeing lots of strategies deployed. You want me to roll into
Yeah.
my Cleveland Browns take?
Well, one other thing I'll say about this really quickly. I guess I just haven't. I think it's weird when you say a player who has been underpaid, so they deserve more money. And I guess like I could get that, but I don't know. I just have trouble seeing like imagine if Bill Belichick was in in this circumstance. Whoever says is the greatest of all time, and Aaron Donald's like, yeah, coach. I think I'm gonna retire. But maybe if you sweeten the pot here and you just give me all this money, then I'll come back. He'll just be like, have a good retirement, AD. Like he's not gonna. He would not. No way that he would do this. He's like so unsentimental about those sort of things. So I feel like we kind of value those two things simultaneously. We value like players should be rewarded for it, and we also value the cutthroatedness of someone like Belichick sometimes when it comes to those pieces. Even when it comes to Tom Brady when on those teams.
I mean, Bill Walsh was cutthroat when there was no cap.
Yeah.
Strange, just a strange thing. I mean, he put himself through hell, literally. Like he felt so bad about and conflicted emotionally about some of the decisions he made as coach GM that he made himself sick. So I think that there's a better line that you can draw. And again, another reason why no salary cap. So you could pay those players, still not cripple your team. You just maybe you'll force the Mark Davises out of the league, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Ownership is not going to be too hot about it. But yeah,
No,
you're right.
no. Well,
Okay, let's go. Let's go.
all
What
right.
else? What else we got? Heat. Let's bring the heat.
The Cleveland Browns are
Oh,
fake.
here we go.
Are fake shark. They paid.
Oh, okay. Okay. Let's bring it. Let's bring it.
They paid top of market for 2 guards and a running back. They drafted an off-ball linebacker in the second round, and they handled their players poorly, and they refused to move on when relationships go south. So Odell Beckham, who might come back, which is kind of undercutting my claim here, but anyway, and Baker Mayfield. They sit around and they wait until their hand is forced, and their options have been narrowed by circumstances ostensibly beyond their control instead of being proactive. And then when they finally do go all in on a player, as I mentioned on my tweet thread yesterday, it's a big bet on Deshaun Watson, and they pay $250 million of guaranteed money to a dude with 24 sexual assault allegations hanging around his neck. If there was ever a moment to fight back against bad organizational thinking that sharp people would do, that was it. But instead, they got comfortable with it. I think they're the Houston Astros of the NFL, or the McKinseys of the football world, and they really haven't done anything innovative or new to warrant the adoration they get from a lot of analysts.
All right. Yeah. I agree. I mean, I don't know if I agree, but I'm in the ballpark on some of this. I mean, what I will say, and maybe we could talk about Deshaun Watson now for a second. Uh Monday was not a good day for the Browns, for Deshaun Watson, for others. And it's not just because this somehow makes the like legality of what he did or his guilt or innocence, how you would view it that differently. Because quite honestly, like we're talking about going from 23 to 24 civil cases. There have already been, I think there were 3 different criminal cases that were not civil cases. There was a woman who was interviewed by Jenny Vrentis at Sports Illustrated, who also is not part of either procedure. So we're already talking about, prior to this allegation on Monday, we're already talking about 27, 28, different women. So adding one to the mix, other than giving people a reason to comment on it, is not a big deal. But I think an underplayed thing as part of this is that there was no comment from the attorneys and from Watson, because they didn't know this woman existed. Meaning the attorneys did not know that she was out there as a potential accuser in this thing, whereas they did know this 23rd woman from last week. So I don't know, man. This is like all those guarantees, all those everything else. It also is getting to the point of like how comfortable, quote unquote, comfortable can you be when it sounds like you draw a 100-mile radius around the city of Houston and just randomly call anyone who works in the massage business, and there's like a coin flip chance that they've been assaulted by Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, I mean, I I've been pretty vocal about my displeasure with the fact that Deshaun Watson got another opportunity in this league without. I mean, so there's this idea out there that you play hard. Talking about front offices, you play hard until the commissioner steps in, right? Like, and then he's the final arbiter of what of morality in the league, right? And you're just a person here trying to compete with 32 other front offices, and I just think that's a bad way of thinking about this. And I think you pointed out yesterday there were a lot of teams involved, and I think a lot of teams were offering pretty crappy deals to Houston for him. I think they were really trying to take advantage of the situation and saying, look, if we can get him on the cheap, we'll accept all of the baggage that comes along with this, including the very sizable possibility he might not play for 2 years in a row, right? 2 full years in a row. And perhaps more. I mean, there is a chance for the NFL to actually do something strong here and suspend him for a year and a half, 2 years. I don't think it'll happen, but it's possible. So there is an outside shot of 3 straight years of no playing for Deshaun Watson. And that's wild. And so I think there was a reason why he was considered a distressed asset and that teams were poking and showing interest. But what Cleveland did was, I mean, they paid up, man. They paid up in terms of draft capital and in money. And they structured the deal in a way that protects him if he is suspended for an entire year this year. I think only $1 million hit if he gets suspended for the entire season in terms of money lost for Deshaun Watson. So I think the one good thing here for Cleveland, if they are having second thoughts, is if it's correct that the 24th woman is actually an unknown, right? Is not someone who was disclosed to them by Watson or his attorneys. I believe they have an out in the contract.
For
So
the guarantees,
for
yeah.
the guarantees. So if they choose to exercise that because they've just had enough, that would be an out for them. But again, I mean, it dovetails with my take. They just circumstances. Here's the thing about, and I'm not saying there aren't like really smart people in Cleveland. What I am saying is you could have lots of very smart people and have a poorly run organization still, because it's difficult, because it's really, really hard to create an effective, efficient leadership structure that makes good decisions as a unit. And I think there's probably a lot of internal bickering about some of this stuff. There's probably a lot of internal people upset about some of the decisions that were made. But in this case, what they do when they do rally, when they all decide, okay, we have this narrow set of choices we have to make. I think they're the best in the league at finding the least worst path through the forest. I think they really rally, and when they have like organizational clarity, they can make really strong, sharp decisions. Like even with Odell Beckham, I think they found a way to save some money when they cut him by messing around with some factors. And I thought, I forget all the details of it, but I remember being impressed when I read about how they handled that situation at the end, right? When their hand was forced. And so now their hand might be forced again with Watson, and they may have an out. And good for them, I guess. All that just to say, I think they're fake sharp as an organization, but within the organization itself, there's lots of very smart people.
Yeah, I mean they have this whole thing like they have a lot of people working there. Hired some big data bowl guys. They have guys who I've known like Andrew Healy, who's been there for a long time. I talked to David Giuliani on this podcast. He's there. Kevin Mears used to be there, who I've talked to here and is now doing work in sales analytics. So they have a lot of like good people that have been there. They have Paul DePodesta, right? So they have the Moneyball nerd working for them. So I do think there probably is like on a decision by decision basis. I've probably been even too biased to continue to cut them slack over and over again. The Watson thing changed my thinking a bit. I even mentioned with this Njoku contract is that now we're starting to get an accumulation of things where maybe on its face, none of the things, minus Watson, are so egregious that you can say this is awful, like in and of itself by itself. But then if you're not giving them this benefit of the doubt on all of these different things, and you start looking at them without just in a pure clarity, and then you start accumulating all of these different things, it's just not a way to get a sustained advantage if you're not taking all of these potentials to make a little bit of a harder decision, let someone go, turn in a different direction, and then try to squeeze that value out somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. The edges are small in the NFL, and they're squandering a lot of them with their choices, and so you can't accumulate edges that way. I mean, when you're throwing them away, I mean, you're not going to at the end of the day look back and go, oh, look at all that surplus value we generated.
Yeah, 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 and whatever. They're showing some of the pressure, I think, for timeline and for other things as far as getting things done after having a playoff appearance a couple of years ago, wanting to push forward. Okay, so this is my last one here. It's not super hot, but this is an idea that I've had that kind of got validated even more this season. Is that I believe players, especially skill position players, but players generally, if they have a reputation for being a top guy, for being an athletic guy, don't do any athletic testing as part of the NFL draft. Just skip the whole process. I know the NFL is not going to like to hear this. The draft is a big money maker for them, but I think there's almost no evidence for top picks that there is a bias against players who skip the testing or are too injured to test. And I put that in quotes because guys like Drake London this year, he was recovered well enough to do drills at his pro day, but then he just never did the athletic testing. So again, London was the first wide receiver taken this year at number 8. Jamison Williams, coming off of an ACL, went at 12. And we kind of I think there's more of a bias in people's thinking to assume the best when we have no information rather than assume the worst. So, like, we're assuming that Jamison Williams would have run a 4.28, but we don't even know because we have nothing to go on because of the ACL and other things. And I look back at guys who hadn't tested in the past, who were winning the first couple of rounds in the NFL draft. And none of these guys, I would say, were undervalued, even with the perspective at the time of who we thought they were, and definitely not in hindsight. I mean, Corey Davis had a broken foot, did not test in the NFL draft. He went 5th overall in the NFL draft, where he was kind of a stretch anyway. So he went 5th. Jalen Waddle did not test last year. He went 6th. Devontae Smith did not test last year. He went 10th. Marquise Brown went 25th overall, the first wide receiver taken in a draft with a lot of great receivers in it. KJ Hamler went 46 in the second round, and Van Jefferson went 57. So those are the guys that were these guys who a lot of them went earlier than you would have thought, maybe, or at the very least, they did not go any later than you would have thought based upon the testing. So I say for these guys is like, just don't test. If people are like, we believe you're an athletic guy, like a Traylon Burks this year, like even a DK Metcalf before, even though DK Metcalf ran a big 40, there were questions about his agility times. It's like, just don't test. Let people's minds work and think of the rosiest outcomes for who you are and who you may be athletically based upon what you put on tape. So that maybe it's going to kind of kill the combine a little bit, but that would be my advice to the agents and to these players is just stop testing.
So is this just a wide receiver take?
I think it goes for guys beyond wide receiver. I mean, Najee Harris is another guy who didn't test last year, who ended up being drafted pretty high. I think it's just like if you're already established as being a pretty good player, and my alternative take is once you're established as being a good player, stop playing in college. Also, until like we saw this with a lot of guys with the COVID season, like not only did it not affect their draft status, but it was like an excellent class. All these guys at the top of the class who didn't end up playing, just start training for the NFL draft, right? Or training for the NFL right then. So that would be my two things is once you've established yourself, there's going to be a team at least, or a few teams who will talk themselves into you. And the lack of information does not hurt you as much as the potential for new negative information. You know what I mean? That's what really can hurt you here, and not the lack of information.
That's interesting, and that's fair. I think there is a missed opportunity for the rubes to double count, though. I mean, that happens so often that I would almost. I think you make more money betting on teams to be dumb than you do on betting on them to be smart. But what would you say to Lamar Jackson? Was he helped or hurt by not testing?
I don't know. I don't think it mattered, but yeah, he obviously went at a lower range than what you would have expected, but it sounds like the concerns were a little bit deeper than that. And again, I don't think like if he would have run a 4.3, 40. I don't know. Would that have, was that a concern for anyone? So I don't think he was affected by that, but you're right. That is a guy who went lower than you would think when he didn't test. But then again, with the quarterback, it might be a little bit of a different discussion.
Yeah, and again, like I think it's a bit of a different discussion because people or teams, at least back in 2018, were undervaluing mobile quarterbacks, right? I think that has kind of gone the way of the dodo a little bit. Even Josh Allen is viewed as a mobile quarterback, and he is. But that was one of the big reasons why Buffalo liked him. So I think even pocket passers who have mobility are getting properly valued now. All right.
Yeah. All right. Let's get
Speaking
it in.
speaking of passers, at the most important position in football, nobody knows anything. Evaluators are lost.
The nihilist. We're going straight nihilist now.
Analytics people are lost. I mean, a person can make an entire career out of taking credit for one good QB pick. But in any given building in the NFL, all opinions on every QB are held, right? There's someone on every team that loved a bust like Trubisky, and then there's someone who loved Mahomes and wanted their team to take him. The problem is that the guy that was right on Mahomes also thought Josh Rosen was a safe, high ceiling pick. So picking QBs isn't completely random, so I'm not a complete nihilist, but there's no edge beyond creating general tiers and then firing as many shots as you can and refusing to stop until you get a hit.
So you're saying, by the way, let me take that last point here. So you're saying you should be firing more at these guys, or what is the remedy? What's the remedy to this fact that we know nothing?
Well, I didn't say we know. Okay, I did say we know nothing, but we know nothing about once we have tiers, how to rank within a tier. So for instance, if we might have an agreement that there's 5 or 6 good QBs in a particular class. Rank ordering them within that tier is not something that we're capable of doing. Evaluators or analytics people. And so once you get to that point, given these facts, and I think they're undisputed. I mean, people within the league, as I mentioned, may want to take credit for certain picks because that's how you advance your career. But in terms of actually, it's kind of like hedge fund managers. They just there's no evidence that over the long term they're any better than the market. So all you do is the only sensible alternative is to just fire more bullets at those types of guys. And so maybe your tier is a little bigger than the next team, so that gives you a slight edge. That's perhaps one way, but in general, you just need more picks. And unfortunately, that's likely going to mean trading up. Like for instance, this year we didn't have a large tier of top elite quarterback talent. The year previous, that might have been a good year to trade future picks to move up into the first round, to have 2 first-round picks and take a couple shots at quarterback. Something no team would ever do as currently constituted, because that is just anathema. You don't put competition on the field, 2 rookie quarterbacks. That's crazy. No one would ever do that, except the Dallas Cowboys when they took Troy Aikman and Steve Walsh. But here we are.
Yeah, the quarterback thing. Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts about how teams approach quarterback. What you mentioned about with Lamar Jackson, I thought was interesting because, I don't know if he fell to 32 because there was that low of an evaluation with him, or because there are only X number of teams who are really committed to spending capital on a quarterback every season. And then he was in a year where, the Browns got Baker Mayfield, so that seat's gone. Then the Jets get Sam Darnold, so then that seat's gone. Then the Josh Allen goes to the Bills, and that goes away. And then Josh Rosen goes to the Cardinals, and that goes away. And then it becomes a situation where they're just teams that are maybe ambivalent about whether they want to go, and a guy can fall further and further. And I felt like that was a little bit of the case this year with these guys falling to the third round. Is that, I described it as being almost like musical chairs. And what they didn't realize is that there was only really one chair of a team that said, I'm willing to spend first round capital on a quarterback. And that was the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the Pittsburgh Steelers didn't know they were the only team there. If they knew they were the only team there, maybe they wouldn't have even had their chair in there in the first place. Someone sat down there, and then these quarterbacks are just walking around, and no one was willing to put their chair in until later on. So, how confident are you in a year like this that these quarterbacks were like third round talents versus being maybe like a second or first round talent? Or is it just now like the NFL is just more full of quarterbacks? I mean, Garoppolo and Baker Mayfield, you can't even just find a spot for them when these are guys that were considered to be like league average type quarterbacks.
Well, I think it was ridiculous that teams were continuing to pass on quarterbacks just because the value, if you do hit, is much greater than any other pick you could make in the second round. And they just weren't doing it. And I think that that's just it's a failure of imagination by all these front offices. And so yeah, no, I think this class probably could end up being better than our current perception, just for that simple fact alone. But I also think though that we can reliably say there are good draft classes and bad ones in general, in the grand sweep of things. And there's ways to plan around that. I think.
Okay, well let me throw out this. I want to go on this a little bit further, so we can get some hotness here from the takes. I'm going to give you a team, and you're going to tell me. Forget about this particular draft class, but would you already be drafting a quarterback in the? I don't. What do you think about second round quarterbacks? Is that even or would you just go straight for first round?
I think the fifth round option or fifth year option has lost a little bit of its value, but I still
Yeah.
would rather take a guy in the first.
Okay, well, let's just say an early quarterback who should be firing at a
Sure,
guy right now.
sure.
How about the Eagles and Jalen Hurts? How should they feel in a year where they had a couple of first round picks? If there was a guy to look at, which just seems like it was just off the board for them, should it have been?
They should have drafted a quarterback. Yeah.
Okay, right. So they should draft a quarterback. How about the Chicago Bears?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. How about the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I like this. Okay, so I can pretty much I don't know if there's even a point in continuing this exercise
Well,
because you're just gonna say yes to everybody.
well, I
Here.
mean, look. So there's probably 4 or 5 guys.
Where's the threshold? Yeah, that'd be the question. Okay, that'd be the question. That's a good one. So like Dak Prescott, you're good with him, I assume, or no?
I would
Or
draft.
should you? Or
I would draft.
should the Cowboys be drafting one?
Yeah, they should be drafting.
Ooh, okay.
I think when you have a younger quarterback who's either still on his rookie deal and you're absolutely convinced he's going to get a second with your team, a second contract with your team, or a guy like Josh Allen who's still young and who just signed a big one, that I think you're in a window and you want to hit the other parts of your team. Absolutely, you're
Okay,
absolutely
okay.
convinced
Well,
you have
I
your
gotta
man.
keep going. I gotta keep going then.
Yep.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with this, but he's elevated a bit here. Matthew Stafford, so the Rams.
Yeah, absolutely. Draft a
Okay,
quarterback.
so
But I mean, where are the Rams going to draft a quarterback? I mean, that just never happened.
yeah, I guess that's kind of true. All right, Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah,
Okay, Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson.
absolutely.
Okay. It's okay. Maybe this would be a quicker exercise if I just went the other direction and said like, what teams would you not draft a quarterback? So the Chiefs, would you draft a quarterback
No,
in the
I would
first 2 rounds?
I would probably give them a pass if they didn't draft a
You're
quarterback.
like, 50-50. Chargers.
No, you don't need to draft a
Okay. Buffalo Bills.
quarterback. No, you don't.
Okay, so we got 3 at least. Who would be next? Cincinnati Bengals.
Probably not. But I would not
Okay.
blame them if they did.
Okay, so we have those. I don't know if I'm confident in anyone else here because I'd assume just for age reasons, you would be okay with the Packers or
Yes.
the Bucks drafting quarterbacks,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so we have 4. Is there anyone else? I mean, Russell Wilson for the Denver Broncos, I guess after you traded for him, it'd be kind of weird, but
Well, but see that's one where I might not be so upset simply because they're really leaning into this whole notion of we're going to get the stable veteran QB, build a great team around him, and shoot our shot for a year or two. So,
right.
if they're willing to go 3 or 4 years in the wilderness being mediocre or less after Russ is gone, or even with Russ and his dotage, fine. That's fine to pass on it and just try and win now.
Okay. Well, what if let's say Deshaun Watson. I'm trying to think of anyone else. Like, if this shit never happened, right? This
Sure.
if all the sexual assault accusations didn't happen, he was like coming into the 2021 season, not knowing all this stuff. Would he have qualified that type of level talent? Because I can't really think of anyone else.
here's the thing about the Browns is like on paper they have a pretty stacked roster, right? And
No, I agree. I feel like they're kind of being undersold as a Super Bowl team this year. I mean, if he's going to play
if they
enough
had
games,
Watson,
yeah.
if Watson was playing, given the roster that they have, I would forgive them for not drafting a quarterback. But their current situation, they should have drafted.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And the only other guy, I guess, I mean, Trey Lance, I guess you still, he's a total unknown.
Yeah, you draft.
Okay. It was after it's gonna be a little bit difficult after giving away or a couple of extra first round picks to go get him. But I like, okay, I'm not against this, quite honestly, because if you think about it, like your random second round pick, I mean, these guys don't end up doing anything all the time, right? So yeah, I just feel like there's a definite this has been my take, which I probably mentioned multiple times on here. There's this feeling there's a bias towards quarterbacks in the NFL draft that they're being taken too early, and I think if anything, it's the opposite because you draft a quarterback even at the end of the first round. Like think about someone like Paxton Lynch, right? They got drafted for the Broncos. So what? You blew a pick in the 20s. Like who gives a shit, right? But yet it's like Paxton Lynch. The Broncos stink. All this drafting quarterbacks, all this stuff ends up happening. Like if anything, that gets weighed down and anchor around GM's necks. An unsuccessful mid first round pick where you can just write off a position player who ends up busting just as hard.
It's interesting. It's again back to the Broncos with Drew Lock. Like I think the only reason why they got hung with Drew Lock is because they didn't just keep firing. Like if you just,
Yeah,
if you, it kind of you inure people to it if you just keep doing the thing, right? And also
yeah.
if you don't build up expectations the next year that maybe this is the year the Lock turns the corner. When I think in camp they had a pretty good idea that first rookie season that this might not be our guy, and so you just keep firing, and I think that I think that's the way to go.
Yes, I agree. This is great, Josh. Keep firing them takes on those Twitter streets. Also, follow Josh on Twitter at Frisco Josh. Josh, you got anything in the hopper for this off season or coming up next year you want to preview for us?
Sure. Yeah, working hard on actually creating and updating approximate value in a way that I think reflects the actual value that teams place based on contracts on each position. And so with that, you can do cool things like calculate surplus value using open source methods. So I think that'll be something we'll roll out this year, and I think it'll be useful for me, everyone. It won't be as good as what people are doing inside the best teams or what you're doing at PFF, but it'll be something everyone can put their hands around. I think it'll be good.
No, no. I mean, I think that'd be great. I mean, you mentioned approximate value's kind of been around for the longest time, where approximate was a good word because there was a lot of approximation going on when it comes to position players. I mean, for non-skill level players and others, where you had to just kind of splice up an overall pie of value for a team with the best estimations and not necessarily derive like exact values or even any better than an approximate value for a lot of different players. So yeah, if that can kind of become like the new standard for the outside, a little bit less opaque. I mean, it was explicit how they were calculating it, so that's probably helpful vis-a-vis something like our WAR calculation. But yeah, anything that gives people a measure to even start doing this type of real analysis tethered to wins, tethered to value is very important.
Yeah, and I think if you actually look at what he was doing with approximate value, he was really just taking EPA per drive and divvying it up. And I think that's a fine way to do things. It wasn't as granular because he didn't have play level data. But when you introduce snaps and snap share, I mean, you can really start getting at things in a pretty reasonable way. Not perfect by any means, but definitely I think will be a step forward.
All right. Well, we'll be on the lookout for that. We'll also maybe I'll bug you to come back on here again to explain it to us when it's the case. Otherwise, go ahead, follow Josh on Twitter, and I appreciate everyone tuning in here. If you have your own blasphemous takes you want to post on the YouTube video here, or go ahead and you can shoot me a note on Twitter or kevin.cole@pff.com. I will read them out on the next podcast. Otherwise, I'll be talking to everyone next week. Thanks so much, and I'll talk to you then.